Hi, it's Dr. Turan, and you're listening to The Pop. The Pursuit of Peace podcast is brought to you by SP Consulting Group, where the mission is bringing your vision to life.
We are here live again with Pastor James McCarroll of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so good to be here again.
Yes. So you all are in for a treat. Again, we were pleasantly surprised when we heard that we were going to be able to have Pastor McCarroll again here with us. And so I just wanted to take some time to initially just share with you guys what we're talking about. And when I'm saying what we're talking about, I'll always have to give a heads up, because when it's all said and done, everybody is doing a lot. Everybody is going through a lot. And I always like to take the time to remind you guys of what we're talking about, why are we here. And today, as a continuation on from our first two sessions, we were talking about the ultimate sacrifice when it comes down to servant leadership, right? So when we're talking about servant leadership and we're talking about the sacrifice, ultimately, we're talking about, we know that servant leadership is a form of a leadership practice that a lot of people nowadays are saying is the top notch. Like, that's what we need to do. That's what we need to have. That is what's most effective and most impactful. But yet it's really hard and a challenge, from what I've seen, for people to have an authentic expression of this particular leadership model. And so today, when we're talking about that, I know that Pastor McCarroll and I were looking at, okay, so we've been talking about servant leadership from the standpoint of whether it's Robert Greenleaf. We've been looking at servant leadership from the 7 pillars of leadership from James Sipe. So just in case you guys are going to look that book up, it's called The 7 Pillars of Servant Leadership, Practicing the Wisdom of Leading by Serving. And so that's James W. Sipe and Don M. Frick. So just so that you guys know, that's what we're looking at. And of the 7, and just briefly, pillar 1 is a person of character. Pillar 2 is puts people first. Pillar 3 is skilled communicator, and so on, with compassionate collaborator, foresight, systems thinker, and someone that leads with a moral authority. And these are the characteristics that we want to really focus on today. And when we're looking at the ultimate sacrifice, something that the pastor and I really pointed out was, when you are looking at today's day and age, like what's going on, what is considered a sacrifice for people, we're looking at pillar 2, which is putting people first, and pillar 7, leading with the moral authority. So we're going to focus in on that, and we're going to just jump right into it. I do want Pastor McCarroll to, again, tell us who you are, so that for those, if you're listening to it for the first time, you know, and for those that have been listening the whole time, they get a refresher and know how to reach you for all of the amazing things that you're doing.
Okay. Well, I'm James McCarroll. I pastor First Baptist Church here in the beautiful city of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I have a ton of hats I wear. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a writer. I'm a publisher. I'm an author. I am a speaker, international speaker. I do a number of different things. And at the end of all of it, I'm a servant. So I'm just a servant of God and a servant of the people of God. In whatever capacity I'm called to serve. And so that's really the snapshot. If you want to check out more, you can check out jamesmccarroll.org, jamesmccarroll.org, and it'll give you more information. But that's who I am in a nutshell.
Absolutely. And he is doing amazing work internationally. So we want you guys to just keep watching, because you're going to see why we ended up saying, okay, can we please have you for the whole month? Because this is just amazing, like so on point. And when it comes down to it, let's start, Pastor McCarroll, with looking at putting people first.
Okay.
When we're talking about putting people first and we're talking about the ultimate sacrifice, what are some things that come up for you?
So before we jump into that, let's just define sacrifice to make sure we're all on the same page, because it can be a very relative term. So we'll borrow Merriam-Webster's definition. It's the destruction or surrender of something for the sake of something else. So either getting rid of something or giving up something for the sake of something else. And it goes on to give kind of a B clause or B version to that definition, which is something that's given or something that's lost. And so when we talk about the ultimate sacrifice and giving up something for something or someone else, you can't help but to have this conversation of putting people first. It's this understanding that the greatest love you can ever have for a person is to literally make a sacrifice. Jesus says it in John 15:13. He says, greater love has no man than this, than to lay down his life for a friend. So when you talk about putting people first, it's such a powerful concept, because throughout the Word of God, throughout the Bible, and even in the corporate world, you find out that there are really like only three potential audiences for any person to engage. The first is God, whether that's God, or whether it's a God that they made out of something else. The second are the people around you. And the third is you. And so when you talk about the audiences that you have, usually whoever or whatever your God is what gives you the mandate. That's the mandate you adopt. That's the mandate you ascribe to your own personal journey. And then the big piece, though, is choosing who the secondary audience is. And so if you're not careful, you'll find yourself using the opportunity you've been given to either serve yourself or serve others. And so when we talk about putting people first, you're going to always sacrifice one to serve the others, serve the others. So either you're going to sacrifice people to serve yourself, or you're going to sacrifice yourself to serve people. And the servant leader is the one that says, you know what, I'm going to make the personal sacrifice so that someone else can be effectively and efficiently served in the calling that I've been given by God.
Well, something that comes up for me, and it's a little concerning. And what's concerning is that nowadays the vision for living a life that is peaceful, that is full of joy and happiness and the like, is filled with like serving yourself. Yeah. You know, like even people make jokes and really put a twist on, you know, the whole I concept, iPhone, iPad, whatever. And when it's all said and done, I think about, okay, wait a minute. If everyone is saying, do you only live once, how is that really helping and feeding, giving life to the servant leadership model when there's that aspect of putting other people first, not yourself?
Yeah. So the challenge is, as I told you, there are three audiences. There's going to be the primary audience, which is your God, then the secondary audience, which is either yourself or others. Usually that's the result of the primary audience being pleasure. So when you make up your mind to say, I want self-gratification to be my God, or self-pleasure to be my God. So I want to make sure that my physical, carnal, bodily feeling is good. And I want it to be really what directly benefits me. When it becomes something that's going to be personally pleasurable, and pleasure is the top item or the top priority, then that item becomes your God. And so either that, or or the social model, the pop cultural model becomes your God, then normally what happens is the tools of service, time, talent, treasure, usually are then bent toward the command or the prompting of your God. So in the whole do me culture, it's all about me. I want me, mine. I only live once. All of that boils down to a God that says it's about you. And so when that's your God, then automatically the secondary audience becomes yourself. And
that's
so
interesting.
So
that's
the
interesting.
go ahead.
Wow.
I can go on. I'm so amped up for the night. But the God that calls you usually comes with an audience in mind.
Mm.
And so go ahead.
I do want to cut you off for a second because we're about to get good into this. And I forgot to let everybody know that this episode is possibly going to go a little bit longer than an hour. We're going to try to keep it. We're going to try. But this is really touching on, and I'm sure it's going to make some people feel uncomfortable because, and I'm going to drop it back off to you, Pastor McCarroll, because a lot of people don't think that by attending to their own needs and putting themselves first, mm-hmm. that they're worshiping, that they're in a state of worship.
Yes.
Rather it's, I'm not worshiping myself. I just know I need to take care of me.
Yeah. And there's a difference between self-care mm-hmm. and, for lack of a better term, self-aim, if that makes sense. So with one is self-care is the practice of making sure your body, which is one of the tools, is in the best shape possible to carry out the greater mandate from God for others. Mm. Self-aim is when I only see my body as both the cause, the goal, and the tool. And both the cause and the goal. So my end game is me. My start game is me. And that's a totally different model. That's a more selfish agenda or self-centered agenda. And so there are two totally different things. So people say, well, like you said, I'm going to just look out for me. I'm going to look out for me. I'm going to look out to make sure I'm good. If I'm not good, no one else will be good. And that's true in theory, right. But in practice, if no one else is ever in the picture, unless they're becoming an ornament on your life, then you really have a self-centered model, which is not a servant leadership concept.
Right.
It's a serve the leader concept.
And that to me is so meaty in it of itself, because truly, when it's all said and done, our society has pushed us to that place of everything should be about you in order for you to live that life. And it's really easy, and whether I want to put it all out there or not, but it's really easy to get wrapped up in the stresses of life. And then the conversation changes from, and it's very subtle, but it goes from self-care to being selfish. Mm-hmm. You know, and a lot of people don't realize the difference or notice when the shift happens. And it's easy to get lost in that shift because you are saying, hey, even for those that are usually givers, usually healers, someone that is always usually, putting someone else first. And then they say, well, I need to take care of myself. Okay. But mm-hmm. then when a certain attitude takes a turn, it's not just I need to take care of myself. It becomes, oh, well, I did that before. I attended to everyone else's needs before, and now it's just about me. I'm just going to have to put everybody on hold. What is it about that shift?
So the commandment of God comes to us. I'm going to use this language. I may have to unpack it, but it comes to us a word at a time. So the calling always comes in a word or a prophetic format, whether that prophecy is actually a preacher or something like that, or whether that prophecy is just you sensing a calling upon your life. It's always a prophetic format. So when you begin with God, God's always going to tell you, hey, this is what I made you to do. This is specifically what I've called you to do. So it's a word. Got to keep that in mind. It's a word. It's a word. And so the goal is to live out or to give God a return on investment as it pertains to the seed of the word that he's deposited into our hearts. Mm. The challenge is when you step away from cultivating and complying with that seed to take a break, you risk weeds choking the word.
Wow.
And so it's kind of like I have a garden outside, and it's really nice. If you miss Garden Talks, check it out on Facebook Live. So I have this little garden. It's not a lot. I'm not like Farmer John or anything, but I've got my own little thing. So here's the catch. Whenever I take 3 or 4 days off from tending to the garden, the number one concern I have going back is not the vegetables. It's not the herbs. It's the predators and the weeds. Because I understand the moment I take my hands away from consistently cultivating that which is being grown, that's the very moment that weeds pop up and predators show up.
And I love that you give that example, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but I really want people to get what it is that I'm receiving from what you're saying. And what I'm getting from you is when you are going out to tend to your garden, it's not because of, I want to make sure the seed that I planted, it brings forth fruit. That's what you believe is the automatic. Yes. What you're going out to do is make sure that you're standing guard of anything that could possibly prevent what you know to be the automatic result.
Yes, and so here's the analogy. Okay. You are the garden. The seed is the word of God being planted into your dirt. Wow. And your calling is the fruit. What your calling produces is the fruit that comes from the dirt. Wow. So Jesus says it this way in Luke chapter 8. He says that he talks about weeds getting into the garden that choke the word. Yeah. He says the weeds are, the cares of life, the riches of this life, the things that would draw our attention away. In other words, the very elements that the world brings into your life. And so if you're not careful, what normally happens is, number one, people, by the time they take a break, are so tired that they're vulnerable to satanic and antagonistic influence. And so they're vulnerable to weed exposures or weeds popping up. And that the goal of that weed is to choke the word or the seed so that it doesn't produce fruit. And here's what Jesus says. He says, the weeds come right when you begin to produce fruit. Wow. So right when you get ready to serve, right when you're making those sacrifices, that's the first time someone will call and say, you shouldn't do that much. You're doing too much. You're giving too much. Or it's that moment where these thoughts start popping into your head about how you're really doing more for them than they're doing for you. And so it begins to question that which you are giving, going back to sacrifice, that which you're giving to others versus that which you're giving to yourself. Right. And so it makes you question the secondary audience.
Right. And the reason why I wanted to dig into that is for the very reason that you just expounded upon. And as we are, again, continuing, like you said, going back to the putting people first component of servant leadership, one of the things that comes up with putting people first is people before the prophets, people before what it is that you think is going to come from, like you said, the planting, like before you get the fruit from what you planted, it's, okay, I need to take care of this. I need to take care of the people first. As long as I take care of the people, and to be honest, this goes into the place where a lot of leaders that I've heard who got it right just about halfway, right? They get a little bit close to the edge, and then it's like, this is where we're taking them a little bit further. Yes. And that is, okay, if I know that if I tend to my garden, yes, and I put their needs first, making sure that they're cared for, it's an automatic that I'm going to produce.
Yes. Yes. So in the book, The Seven Pillars, it talks about the fact, and it says on, let's see if I can find it. It basically says that the best kept secret of successful leaders is love, which points directly back to sacrifice. And to your point, most leaders, they think about profits, but that thought of profit is usually an external impulse that pops up in the season where they're trying to become servant leaders.
Right.
So these dollar amounts or bottom lines or returns for investors, all of these things are the concepts that sneak in a season where they're trying to really become servant leaders. And here's the crazy part. The most successful companies are the companies that are ran by servant leaders. So literally, if you take care of the people around you, according to the calling that's on you, the high profits come as a natural byproduct. So if you make up your mind to guard the garden and to cultivate the garden, to give it its best opportunity and its best potential to perform, the health of the garden and the harvest is a byproduct of a compassionate farmer.
And if you realize that, then it becomes very productive for you to go into the space of introspection. And I want to pose a question that you could ask yourself, right? When you are, like you say, whether it's the beginning of cultivating this servant leadership practice as a leader, or even refining who you are in your natural purpose of being a servant leader. The question is, and this is actually in the book, on page 38, it says, do I feel, and this is a self-check, okay? I love giving people self-checks. Do I feel the natural desire to serve in my body as well as in my mind?
That's it.
Where is it located? Can I access it in times of stress when I need to touch this part of my deepest self? And that is what I always incorporate into servant leadership trainings. It's not just know the 7 pillars. It's not just knowing all of these things that we're talking about. It's like, okay, now that you know, we know that there is a G.I. Joe fallacy basically saying you really don't know better and do better. You know, that's not the relationship there. You can know better and still not do better. Right. So it's like, how do we get you to do better? And like I said, I always start off with the question of, do your self-check, ask yourself the question, is this natural for me? You know, is this natural? And if it's natural, where is it coming up for you when you are able to then, and watch this, this is now the sort of, I say, one of the gears to this is emotional intelligence, where not only are you now self-aware, you are now managing yourself. And that was what that was asking. Are you able to be attentive to yourself and know at a point of an awareness that you can actually do something about it and manage it when you're stressed? Because just like you said, this comes up a lot of times when people are just now climbing the ladder and they're getting more and more responsibility, and that growth for some translate into this this high of, let me go get it. I need more. I need more. I need more. You know, and you keep pushing, and that unsettled, unsatisfied state put in and coupled with stress can easily be an easy way for you to step away from putting other people first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You own it tonight. I hear you.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
Own it tonight. And you're exactly right. You know, when it comes, there's so much I want to say, but I'll begin here. So you're exactly right. It's when you go back to this management piece, one of the great challenges is you have to ask yourself, is serving what I do, or is it who I am? And so in Greenleaf's book, he talks about finding a person that's a servant and making them a leader.
Okay.
Versus trying to take on the facade of a servant as a leader.
All right.
And so what often happens is people try to play the masquerade game or the be a leader while you're at work game. And that works for a while until challenging circumstances come.
Right.
And so
we get into our challenging space, whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally, that's when we revert back to our baseline.
Yes. So if that's the case, then it's usually an indication that serving is what you've chosen to do, but it may not be who you are. And that's a hard conversation to have. I know y'all like, don't let them come.
I'm like, you're putting some people on blast right now.
That's the real challenge, is that when I have that hard day and the opportunity to serve comes up, if I can say no, there's an indication that now I have a switch somewhere that's controlling my servanthood.
Right.
And so if there's a switch for service, then it's usually connected to a switch for sacrifice.
Right. Because then ultimately, where do we go?
Yes.
To the choice.
Here's the big piece. Whoever your God is, you will have no switch connected to them. Because whoever you worship has such a high worthship that you will surrender anything at any moment or any time to make sure their agenda goes forth.
So what? Okay. So tell me this. If you are saying that your spirit needs to be right in order for you to end up doing right, where does that leave us?
So here's the thing. Either way it goes, you're going to serve something or someone. So you're going to be a servant leader. The question is, who is driving the servanthood? So you get a person that's money driven, for instance, and their goal is to make $1 million in a year. They will serve in any capacity. Money will tell them stay up all night long, work until you're absolutely at the point of just collapsing.
Right.
You put your family aside, put your friends aside, reset all of your priorities, and you're going to lead serving money.
Mm-hmm.
But usually that type of leader makes you the audience.
Wow.
But when you serve God and you're following an eternal calling, remember, number one, God will never give you a calling that's about you. He will always call you or invite you into a calling that's between him and someone else.
Right.
And so when you understand that, then you realize that you have to the cultivation in that process of serving is first you're serving God, which is not you, and you're serving others, which don't have to do with you, which is not a direct service of yourself. And so when you watch that dynamic, which is so huge, now all of a sudden you have to now cultivate a service habit, if you will, that can handle that. Now, here's the crazy part. Whether you're serving money or you're serving God, servanthood has to still be cultivated. The problem is, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so for our listeners, how do you know the difference? And I'm asking that because I know for me, because I serve my God, I feel convicted, in my spirit when I'm going in the wrong direction or he gets real quiet if I'm working in my own space as opposed to through him and him letting me lead, right?
Yes.
So for those that may be wondering, they may be questioning, they may be in just different levels of spaces spiritually, how would you recommend they come to a place of knowing for themselves who they serve? And I know that you gave a few examples, but for some it may still be a little blurry. Okay. How can they do their self-check to know where they stand?
Okay, so it's when there's a resource conflict. So I told you there are 3 primary tools for serving. Time, I'll say your body or your skills, and then your resources like money or whatever you hold as valuable. So the way it happens is at some point you'll have one set of resources and 2 options for the resources. And so for instance, let's say the Lord lays on your heart, God tells you, okay, I want you to use that $5 to help this young child purchase their meal. And while you're on the way to the young child, You just so happen to be in a mall and you pass a window that says, a once in a lifetime deal. We have red bottom shoes for $5, marked down from $1,500 to $5. You only have.
So you are wrong for that example. I'm just saying.
I'm caught. It's rough. I know it's getting rough for you. Everybody's mad. I'm
starting to sweat. Like, wait a minute.
Like, no longer panelists. Leave.
Come on, bring it.
So in that moment, you begin to see. That's one way of seeing who God really is. And it's in that one area. So it may be that, and God wins every space of our lives. It takes time. Sometimes it takes some time to win our minds and win our hearts and win our resources and win our time. It takes time. But you begin to see in that moment who you're really following.
Right.
Who you're really worshiping. And really, you're the audience, but you're not the God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Pleasure. It may be pride, that's the God. It may be lust of the eyes, that's the God. It may be lust of the flesh, that's the God. But whatever that God that the world has given you in that moment, whoever that God the world has given you in that moment is, that's the one saying, I know that kid, somebody will feed that kid, that kid. So just pray that the Lord will send someone else to give $5 so you can get these red bottoms, because you don't know when this sale will ever come back. And so when you're in the point where you begin to question how you can get out of the holy obligation to fit the human agenda.
Yeah.
Or it's the other way around, where maybe someone treats you wrong and your flesh is like, man, speak them out. Go and put some glue in their seat, like while they're gone for lunch break. Like, and it says that, then God comes in and says, no, forgive them.
Yeah.
That's
right.
when you have to let go of the human agenda to follow the holy agenda.
I really like that, because I know that, again, bringing it home to, again, I say workspace nowadays, because some people, again, working from home, some may be in the office or never even left going into the office. And I really like that you brought that up, because when you're talking about servant leadership at home, but then looking at it from when you're at work and the things that you may or may not do in that instance. So, for example, from what you just finished bringing up, maybe it's someone wronged you and you have a resource, or you have access to someone that you know that they could benefit from. But instead of giving up that information or allowing that access, because you're like, just in case I want it for me, I don't want this person to outshine me, or whatever may be the dialogue in your head. That's an example where you can really say to yourself, okay, do better. and say, I am to serve everyone else before my personal need, because what's for me, it doesn't matter what access they have, what resources they have or not. It does not matter, because what's for you, whether it's for your role in a particular job, say that you are a leader that isn't in a leadership role, whatever it is for you, it's for you. Yes. So there's those automatic tests that are built into those situations, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And so it's the scripture where Jesus says, he gives this parable, if you will, this lesson on the steward. And these three guys get three different gifts, and they have to show the person that gave them to them how they use the gift according to his agenda or his plan. Mm-hmm. And he uses this phrase, good and faithful servant. And here's the thing, the servanthood of God will always be led by God for the sake of others. The servanthood of the world will be led by we'll say carnality for the sake of self.
Right.
And so God will put us in these spaces, and he will elevate us, or for lack of a better term, sometimes plateau or even demote us based upon how we manage the moment we're given.
Yeah.
And how we manage it as how we see it or view it as a tool where we can use it to serve God and ultimately serve others.
Right.
And so to your point, in the workplace, it's so, in most cases, most people work not out of their calling, but they work so they can have money for resources for lifestyle, for living. And so the people that work out of their calling approach the workspace totally different than the people that are working out of a sense of necessity for money.
Right.
Because their goal, when it's your calling, your goal is always outwardly focused.
Right.
And you'll take certain hits and you'll allow certain things to take place because even if it means sacrificing on your part, because you see the bigger picture.
Right.
But when you're doing it for your gain, then usually the sacrifice happens, but it happens with everyone else, not you. And back to this piece on sacrifice, I think it's key that at some point we have to be able to make that decision to put ourselves back a little bit so that the agenda of God for the lives of others as worked out through us can come to pass.
Absolutely. And I even began to, as you said, began to empathize automatically with those leaders that are out there, that they're putting their best foot forward and they may have never heard what we're talking about today. And they may have gotten to a place where they otherwise would have been able to rise to the point of, say, for instance, the people that are in that group of those that aren't in a leadership position.
Yes.
And are waiting on being elevated, right? Which may have been the reason why they're stressed and trying to say, well, let me take care of me so that, I deserve this raise, I deserve this promotion. And it sets a state of urgency in them, and being anxious, where God does say be anxious for nothing, right?
Yes.
And then the other group that may have risen to the point of, okay, they have the position, they have the role, but yet they haven't figured out that piece of managing the stress, the tension, whatever it is that ticks them off, with maintaining focus. Maintaining the focus on other people. And what made me think of that and go to a place of empathy was just, wow, there are people that don't even know that they're getting in their own way. But they haven't really been able to separate the difference between self-care, self-promotion, and there is no end to the self-sacrifice that Jesus has told us, has shown us is necessary to be of ultimate impact and to be of ultimate sacrifice. Meaning there is nowhere where I've seen in his ministry where Jesus has actually said, okay, I get it, that's enough.
So there are a couple of things. So to that point, it's understanding that the first responsibility for the leader that's a servant leader is to move forward the God agenda to the extent that they implant God legacy into the people around them. So they're going, and that's weird language. I'm sure it sounds kind of weird, but here's the thing: their goal is to make sure that the people that God is trying to get them to use them to serve have a greater and deeper appreciation for, development in and with, and usage of God or usage by God. So ultimately, their goal is to make people know God better and to become greater in their callings, greater in their purpose. And so I think it said when in the book 7 Pillars, page 36, where it says that the authors believe, or these guys, John Barbuto and Daniel Willer at University of Nebraska, believe a calling to serve is a desire to make a difference for other people, to impact others' lives, and willingness to sacrifice self-interest for the sake of others. So the core of this sacrifice is making sure that someone is better because you've been in their path, because you've been in their space. And they're not better on your terms. They've become more of what God saw and has ordained them to become because you were willing to make whatever sacrifice was needed to pour into them exactly what you were ordained and called by God to deposit into their lives. And so I think that's a huge piece of it When we talk about this upward mobility, when we talk about staying focused in the task that we're given, whether it's corporate America, whether it's church, whether it's, running a lemonade stand,
Right.
always being cognizant of the fact that the number one goal in any space is to meet a need.
Right.
And to meet a need in the life of someone else. There's a great book called Lead the Field by Earl Nightingale. And one of his key premises is that if you're serious about being successful, learn to find a need that the world hasn't met and meet it well. You'll hear it with Zig Ziglar and all the big dogs of all of these guys say the same thing. And I think that's what Jesus gets us to understand, is that he's like, I came to meet a need in the world that the world couldn't meet on its own.
Right.
But in the process of Jesus being here, his number one goal was to make the people around him better.
Yeah.
Because he showed up.
Right.
And I think that at the end of the day, we focus when the world tricks us to make us think that other people are the ornaments of our wealth pursuit, versus seeing ourselves as a deposit of heaven into their calling pursuit. Then I think we get off track and we start looking at money and bottom lines and all of that and numbers. But when we realize that we're sent to make them better, then the entire agenda changes.
Yeah.
And that's when we're willing to make some really hard calls and some hard sacrifices, because we're surrendered to the will of God and surrendered to the plan of God for other people.
Now, something that comes to mind too, as you said that, like what you're saying is just amazingly on point, because we're at this like state in society and across the world. We keep talking about it. And I keep bringing it up because it's important for us to live and perform in context.
Yes.
In the context of what's going on around us, whether it's around us in our home, around us at work, but from a societal standpoint. And to be quite frank, these days, especially with the pandemic and quarantine, you have people literally doing what they can in their own space, but on the outside in the world, you have a lot of hate, you have a lot of pain, you have a lot of distractions, okay? And so when we're talking about being a light in the midst of all of the mess, and knowing that there's a lot of questions these days in regards to morality, right? People being moral and having a high moral and ethical standard, right?
Yes.
My thought then goes to, again, okay, well, what is the sacrifice when we have such a heaviness that's telling us to be self-centered, to be selfish, to take care of yourself, distance yourself, stay away from people, make sure you are doing your part to stay safe, right? All of this is saying, do you.
Yes. At
the same time that the rest of the world that's still, shucking and jiving along, there's this, again, the heaviness of things just being more immoral, like more, I guess the veil is off is what I should say. The veil has been lifted, right? And I'm bringing that up because I wanted to transition to the point of the moral authority that is also pertinent for the servant leadership, the characteristics of servant leadership. And when someone is leading with the moral authority, it also comes up, and according to Stephen Covey, who's well known in regards to workplace management, organizational management, and change and teamwork, he literally said, like verbatim, I'm going to quote him, the moral authority requires sacrifice. What are people sacrificing if they're just getting on with the get on? Right?
You're so mean. And gentle but mean. You know what they're sacrificing?
Yeah.
They're sacrificing what their moral compass says is negotiable. So the moral compass or the ethical lens is normally shaped by a person's worship. I can't use a better word. And that's whether they're worshiping a car, whether they're worshiping a system, whether they're worshiping money. And so that more that worship piece, what they value as the most worthwhile or that most valuable thing in their world sets a marker. And anything that works toward that becomes morally feasible.
Yeah.
Anything that works against that becomes immoral. Anything that prompts that reality and a version of that reality that valuable thing presents becomes ethical.
Yeah.
Anything that works against it becomes unethical. And so their moral compass is shaped by a culture that pushes selfishness or selfish agendas. So in their minds, their morality recommends that other people's desires, feelings, and lives, for lack of a better term, are negotiable if they're not in alignment with your personal agenda.
Right.
And so they're willing to sacrifice others so that they can have and become. And here's the catch with it. So that's their sacrifice. Now the moral agenda set by the Word of God, or set in the Christian context, is one that we love God first, and we love our neighbors, we love ourselves. So our moral agenda then says, okay, anything that I do that points to me loving God and loving others, it is a moral reality, or it's moral. Anything that points in the opposite direction is immoral. Anything that any principle that prompts me to do that or to become loving is an ethical principle, vice versa with unethical. And so for us to shut the world out and to shut others out now becomes an indictment against our moral authority. But here's the challenge. Whenever you isolate anyone in any space, that's when you really see where their morals are. Because who you really are shows up behind closed doors.
Right. Always.
And if they're stuck behind closed doors, then their habitual pattern will be shaped by and molded by who they are on a regular basis. And so what's happening is it's slipping out now because we've been stuck behind closed doors.
Right. It's almost like we're in this period of purging of people to really recognize and see themselves. Like, I know when this all first started, it was almost like something to joke about, even though it really isn't. But it was something to joke about as far as, oh, wow, I haven't been with my partner or my spouse for this long at one time, or, wow, even if they were someone that was single, it's like, I'm going stir crazy. And it really, to me, when I hear that from someone that's single, it's like, okay, what's going on with that?
So all of that stuff.
Spend some time alone with yourself?
Man, all of it. Like, man, you married, you bashing all those single people, just low down. So you on one tonight. You on one. But like, that's the issue. Like, so what this pandemic has done is it's exposed us to ourselves.
Yeah. Because
it's taken the control out of our hands and it's put us where it's wanted to put us, or places where it's wanted to place us. And then we have to look at our real moral compass, like we've never had, because we don't have the distraction to the same extent. So for some people that are married, it's felt like a honeymoon because they couldn't wait to get home. They hated being on the one, wanted to be home with their spouses. For other people, it felt like a restraining order because they never really married their spouses. They married their workplace. Now they have to go home with the person that they went through the ceremony with that keeps them away from who they really married and what they really married.
Lord.
Dynamics that are coming to the fore, which really makes us ask the question, what are our real morals? What do we who are we really following? Where's our worship really? And then the bigger question is, what have I really been sacrificing, to our point tonight, which makes me think, what and who have I really been valuing?
And I would even throw in the question, who are you Really? Because if you don't know what your values are, if you don't know, what makes you tick and what makes you, feel good and what is true happiness to you, who have you been?
Yes.
Who have you been showing people this whole time? Like, I'm scared, Pastor McCarroll. Who are you?
I'm not coming next week. This is just loaded. Why would you do this to the viewers? They've been on Eventbrite to get here and watch this. Like, this is so low down. But hear what I'm like, that's so heavy.
I mean, really, like, we're talking about servant leadership. Okay, yes. We're talking about ultimate sacrifice. But hold on. Really? If this pandemic is taking you to a space of really recognizing, okay, the veil is off. Who am I? Who did I marry? Or, what is going on with my household and the order or structure thereof.
Mm-hmm. But all of it goes back to, we talk about corporate America, we talk about all of that.
Yeah.
All of that's
talk about it all tonight.
But we have to deal with and this goes back to what Greenleaf said in taking the servant and making them the leader. We have to go back to the person without the title, the person without the position, the person before and after they clock in or clock out.
Right.
And really wrestling, because that's what this is. When you talk about sacrifice, you're talking about not a money issue, not a time issue, not a body issue. You're talking about a heart issue, because where your treasure is only an indication of where your heart is. So what this space has done is it's really made leaders ask the very question you just asked: who am I really? Yep. Why did I really get married? Why did I really decide to have children? Why did I really take this job? Why did we really buy this house?
Yeah.
Why do I really wake up in the morning?
Yeah.
And that's a heavy space, because inherent in that is the very core that drives how you lead the people.
Right.
Until you ask that question, you don't even know who's showing up to take the title on.
Yeah. And I really want to even take that to another step, because I always talk about the intersection. Right. I always talk about the intersection between work-life balance. Like, it is not something to separate.
Yeah.
It's just humanly impossible. As much as people preach all the time, off the record, that, oh, okay, well, my leadership model is my leadership model at work. It has nothing to do at home. Or, I leave work at work, and when I go home, it's something else. I literally even was speaking with someone that works with a lot of people that are like, okay, I'm all the way together at work, but I'm just off and completely a whole different person when I'm at home. And it's like, okay, yes, there is the phenomenon of being a chameleon, right? We get that. We know that you can't do everything that you do at home, at work, and vice versa. But when we are talking about servant leadership and the ultimate sacrifice, I think for some people, the ultimate sacrifice is getting along with themselves.
Yeah, so it goes back to this statement again. Successful leaders, the best kept secret of a successful leader is love.
Okay.
And you have to have some measure of not only love for God and love for others, but also love for yourself. And if we had like another hour, I would dig that. I would talk about Joshua Liebman in his book, Peace of Mind.
Yeah.
How he talks about we're pluralistic individuals, and we have to be able to love every part of ourselves.
Right.
Sometimes we escape to work, and we put our energy into worshiping work because we feel like we're failing at worshiping God.
Yeah.
Or sometimes we become overly religious and we act like we're great at worshiping God because we failed at handling family, worshiping God with family. So you have all of these dynamics, but at the end of it and at the core of it is this conversation about who do I believe God made me to be?
Mm-hmm.
And am I okay with who I've become so far?
Right. Right.
With my mess ups, with my shortfalls. And if I'm not okay with that,
mm-hmm.
then I'll always put a costume on it that fits the context.
Yeah.
And what this period has done is taken off the need for costumes. So I don't have to go into the office, and I don't have a costume for that anymore. The costume stays up. When I'm at home, I don't have the at-home mother costume on because now I'm here not in convenient times or in off times. I'm here all of the time.
Yeah.
And at some point, you have to ask yourself, when there's not a costume party to attend, what suit do I wear? Who am I?
Right.
And like you said, this is such a pivotal thing, because until you know who you are,
right,
and you know how you're called to worship God,
mm-hmm.
you will never understand the real sacrifice being asked of you.
Right.
And you'll find yourself doing because you don't know who you're called to be.
And that is so deep.
Yeah. And it's not until our being shifts
mm-hmm.
that we become effective as servant leaders. Because once you become a servant, you're a servant. It's interesting when we talk about this, that Jesus came, and we talked about this before, in the form of a servant.
Yeah.
That he literally took on the essence and the likeness, if you will,
mm-hmm.
of a servant. And we're called to be conformed to the image of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so we're called to shed all of the selfish impulses and become these servants.
Yeah.
And that's whether we're in corporate America, whether we're a stay-at-home mom, whether we're teaching in the classroom, or whether we're just going to school.
Right.
We're called to be servants. And at some point, you get to a place where you stop serving. You stop serving as a way of putting on a costume, and you begin to say, Lord, I want to, because you don't think you're good enough to serve there, so you put on a costume to do it. You say, let me become a servant.
Yeah.
And if I were God, which I'm not, if I were God, I'd probably make every day 75 degrees. But anyway, but if I were God, my thought would be the best way to get them to lose the costumes and to become authentic would be isolated.
Wow.
Cancel all the costume parties and let them sit with themselves for a while and wrestle with who they have become and what they desire to become and who I'm calling them to become.
Right.
Until we really can come to a place where we understand the sacrifices we're supposed to be making because of who we've been called to be as servants.
Yeah.
And we get and for lack of a better term, we get our priorities straight. We recalibrate our hearts and our minds to be these elements and these vehicles of service in the world.
Yeah. And I really, really, that's just a sobering thought, because even when people begin to have this outcry about having this time alone, which is interesting in and of itself, whole nother discussion about that, right? But it's when you listen to what you just said, and when people listen to this playback, I hope that they really rewind that and really pay attention to what you just said and realize the opportunity that you have. We're talking about servant leadership. We're talking about the sacrifice, and we're talking about it because when we are done with this podcast for this month, or we move on to another topic, what we want you to be left with is this whole mound of gold that we're sharing, that we're getting from Pastor McCarroll, where it ultimately is another opportunity to say, look, if I am on this pursuit of peace as well with Dr. Turan and anybody else in the world that's out there pursuing peace, we have to understand that a lot of times, and I'm speaking to those that know about process improvement, okay, you have to establish a baseline. before you can understand where to go from there. So yes, we're talking about all the things that could make you more productive at work, make you more productive at home, to get results, to make sure that you're minding the relationships that you have and how you delegate and empower people and grow people through that servant leadership style. But you have to start with a solid foundation, because when you started talking about Jesus and how he was a servant, let's talk just for a second. When we're talking about leading with the moral authority, what was Jesus doing for the first 30-something years that he was preparing?
Yeah. So you see, so the first thing you always want to remember is that Jesus had like one agenda. Right. So think about this. God was there from the beginning. So God is in eternity. So he sees time like me holding a pea or a flax seed. He's like, okay, this is time. He's all outside of time, totally outside of time. And he says, okay, I'm going to go into time and I'm going to become a human. And I'm going to do it for one purpose. I'm going to do it for the purpose of getting them back into relationship with me. So I'm going to send myself into time for them to be good with me. So he comes in serving him. God serves himself so that he can save us. So when you think about that, his arrival came in relatively poor conditions. He spends his early years being raised by a carpenter. So if you think about a carpenter's work, very rarely does a carpenter do their work for themselves. In the Jewish community, most people that are working thinking about the needs of other families in mind. Having the needs of other families in mind. So he spent his entire childhood getting splinters for other people. Bumping his knees against the hardened edges of a wooden desk for other people. Lifting weight that was probably, significant amounts for other people. So his entire life was expended in the early days for someone else, building something that will bless someone else. Then from 12 years old to 30 years old, we don't hear anything. So there are a lot of speculations as to what he did. But what we do know is this: when he showed up at 30 years old, right, he was like, I've got one agenda. And that agenda is to seek and save that which is lost. In other words, I've been sent for one purpose, and that is to make sure other people experience the plan of God for their lives. Right. And all he does is serve. Right. All he does is serve. His only point of reference is God. Yes. So when you're talking about leading with the moral authority, he gave us the example there too. So here's a part. Can I go super deep? Please. Oh gosh, this is so good. Jesus, the Bible says in John 13:1, I believe it is, the Bible says he knew he came from God and was going back to God. So the person that understands their eternal assignment or their holy assignment or their God-given assignment or purpose understands that I've been sent by God and I'll return to God, so they don't get caught up in what they get in the dash. People that are uncertain about either the existence of God or their destination highlight the dash in ways that other people don't. And so everything in the dash, everything between the time I show up and the time I leave is lent to service for God. Yeah. So the sacrifice now, and we mentioned this at the outset, what sacrifice defined is the destruction or surrender of something for the sake of something else. I understand my only job in earth, and I said this in the first session, is to make sure God's purpose is done through me. So God only gives me what I need to have to give a world the purpose he's placed on my life. And so when we see people getting elevated, usually it's an indication that they properly stewarded what they were given for the world they were placed into.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to back up a little bit, and this is the heavy piece, when you understand where you're from and where you're going, then sacrifice is no longer a concept of loss.
No.
It's a concept of investment. Because here's the catch. Your only responsibility is to make sure the seed is effectively sown, even if you never stay around to see the harvest.
Wow. Now, I know for a fact that what I'm just saying this for those that are watching, listening. I know that we're over time, and I already warned you guys already that we were going to go a little bit over, because I want to just say something that is to your point, that is in this book that we're referencing, okay? To what you just said, Robert Greenleaf, and this is page 166, where we're talking about moral authority. It says, Robert Greenleaf preferred a similar approach during his years as an AT&T executive. In fact, and this is the kicker, Greenleaf considered himself most successful when no one realized he was the originator of any idea.
Remember the first lesson we talked about becoming invisible.
Yeah. And it brings us back to the space of putting people first and to the space of a moral authority. Because if you know that the moral authority that feeds your ability to properly put people first,
yes,
you are going to God as a source of decision making, and your ideas within your own mind that God is gifting to you is the seed, and all you need to do is plant it and tend to the garden.
It's about to get. I hope you have. It's about to get heavy. You ready for this? I want to drop something that's so heavy, and I'm hoping we have time. We're already over time. I'm sorry, y'all.
It's okay.
I'm going to make all of this time over worthwhile in one statement.
Yes.
No one ever talks extensively about the dirt in the garden. They talk about the person that sowed, the gardener, and they talk about the crop. The mistake we make and the issue we have with sacrifice is we want people to talk about the dirt. So I buy those red bottom shoes because I want someone to see the dirt. Mm-hmm. I get this position and I want to drive the $200,000 Tesla because I want someone to see the dirt. I want someone to see me, to know that I did that.
Yeah.
And the goal in all of this, the goal in our very existence, is that the agenda of God goes forward.
Yeah.
And that the people that were waiting on God remember or recognize that he found them.
Yeah. I want to say this, because we definitely have a couple more sessions to go, right? Yeah. This, again, people don't want to miss, because I'm going to tell y'all what we're going to talk about, but I want to end this one before I tell you what we're going to talk about the next 2 Fridays, because it's a part 1 and a part 2, okay? I want to say this, and this is, again, encapsulating everything that we've been talking about, because I feel like there's a necessity to do a call to action. Mm-hmm. Because of how deep we went and how far-reaching this truly is. And it's towards the end when we're talking about what can you do now?
Yes. And
there's a quote by Marcel Proust, and it says, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes. I wonder if you heard this. Because it's in having new eyes that you are truly discovering.
Wow.
So I'm going to repeat that. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. Okay? And that is a call to action for, again, I'm always asking people, have you done a self-check? You want to embark on something new. Maybe you want to enhance this leadership style for yourself. Maybe you want to adopt this leadership style and toss whatever you've been doing. It's start with yourself. That's something that Robert Greenleaf mentions quite a lot, that this starts with yourself. You have to do a self-check, because when you're doing a self-check, you're realizing that you are mind, body, and spirit. You're not just your thoughts. You're not just your mind, but your core, your soul is a place where it's all of the unseen. It's all of what feeds you and drives you, and you have to pay attention to it. So when we're talking about going into next week, part 1 and part 2 of making it happen. Like I said, we're about to get you guys to do some work. So this is going to be part 1 and part 2. That's going to be the next 2 Fridays. And yes, Pastor James McCarroll will be here, because we just so happen to we've been blessed with an extra Friday in the month. So we were able to put together part 1 and part 2 of making it happen. And it's still in regards to servant leadership. And I just want to read off, because I just can't wait to reveal this. So it says, now that you have heard of a few ways of how servant leadership parallels the ministry of Jesus. So now we're at the point where Pastor McCarroll and I are going to come up with 10 steps. We're going to come up with 10 steps that you all need to have to own it and make it happen. Okay, so that's what we're going to start delving into. So, Pastor McCarroll, I know you're ready. I don't even have to ask. I don't even have to ask. So, I just want you guys to be ready. You guys come to the same place. And Pastor McCarroll, tell them how they can reach you. If they want to delve further into it with you, tell them how they can reach you.
So you can catch me on Facebook, jamesmccarroll.org. You can instant message me there or DM me there. Instagram, Pastor JMC. I'm there. You can follow me there. Or if you want to just go directly to jamesmccarroll.org, you can leave a note there and get it forwarded to my assistant. They'll make sure I get it. If you want to send an email, I would recommend you send it to Holy Impact Movement, all spelled out. I know it's long. Holy Impact Movement @gmail.com. That will help you tremendously, and I'll get that, and I'll be more than willing to respond. So, yeah, that's how you catch me. Or you can send a crow. Put a message in a crow's feet. Send it to Murfreesboro. Tell them go find McCarroll, and I'll do my best to catch it.
Always works. That's how I get through. Y'all know how this was set up, right? We had it through the crow's foot. Anyway. No, but I, again, thank you so much for being such a blessing and blessing our audience through the POP podcast, which, again, as everyone may know and just being reminded of, it is about our pursuit of peace. Okay. And if you all have any questions, want to get in touch with me, maybe you didn't see whatever site and you're used to hearing me say my website, either way, you can get in touch with me at www.officialspconsultinggroup.com. And yes, that's long as well. So it's www.officialspconsultinggroup.com. And when it's all said and done, over the weekend, I will have the podcast on every platform that a podcast can be on, and you're more than welcome to hit me up through those platforms as well. Okay, so we thank you all again, and until next time, you all take care, and thank you again, Pastor McCarroll. We will be keeping in touch for sure.
Okay, looking forward to next week. We'll see you guys here.
All right.